Alright, so first and foremost, these may not be my true beliefs. I think that the purpose of the event itself was to act as a cynic, so that an attempt could be made to break down the arguments that were presented in an attempt to possibly strengthen them. Even if you yourself agree with them, pointing out the intrinsic flaws to something can help you actually strengthen what it is that you're trying to pick apart. Or if it is just flawed, then you can just point out the flaw and then you can state why it is that you think differently. Alright, so now it's time for all of you to change my mind. My mind is made up that there are 7 billion different sexes within the human species alone. And in regards to the existence of any organism that exists, there are approximately 5 times 10 to the power of 30 different sexes in existence. In that sex itself is merely an information system. And the unity of information is all an organism really is. The ova coming in contact with sperm, both are just merely organizations of information. The unity of this information then within itself formulates an organism. In this, every organism is itself a different organization of information. Every single individual organism represents in itself a different sex, in that it receives and transmits information in a different manner because it is composed of a different compilation of information. Therefore, it is entirely a different sex, which means that there are approximately 7 billion different sexes of humans. I mean, in a sense, we can all be an egg, receptive of information. You know, as the saying goes, we're all built to receive. And at times, we can all be dicks as well, spewing off random bits and pieces of information, which can certainly lead to spawning a multitude of demons. Change my mind.
I assume, you want to do good things in the world, right? Like you want to be a good person. Well, you didn't author that desire to want to be a good person or want to be seen as a good person by other people. That sort of happened behind you, so to speak, and you're just living that reality in a way. If that makes sense. So.
Hands?
If morals are causally determined, right, and I can't choose it, are there universal morals then across the world? And if so, what would they be?
So I do think that there are morals, but I think that that's independent of free will, right? And we ought to. I think that there's a way in which we can still tell people to be moral without appealing to free will. I would argue that this way. If we agree that we can operate on people's behavior, and when I mean operate, I mean you can reinforce some behaviors and you can punish other behaviors, and it would decrease the likelihood of an organism performing those behaviors, or increase the likelihood of performing those behaviors. If you recognize that to be true, then I think it's possible to reflect on yourself. Okay, like these principles of operant conditioning apply to myself, and so then you should reinforce verbally things that you think are good, right? Like doing homework and things like that, because you recognize that doing homework and doing good things like that will lead to good outcomes, and doing bad things, so to speak, would lead to bad outcomes. And so I think that in that sense, you just recognize that really the utility of recognizing that there's no free will is recognizing that there are certain ways in which your behavior is shaped by reinforcement or punishment.
Any other questions or comments?
Well, it sounds like you're saying more than behavior shaped by reinforcement, because if you have no free will, then you can almost, it would be possible, even if we can't do it yet, to mechanically predict what people will do given their background
No, that is a good point. I mean, there's more to explaining and predicting behavior than just operant conditioning, of course. But I think that the future outlook should be, instead of holding someone morally responsible, right, and having a retributive justice system, we should rather take anyone who commits a wrongdoing, and we should try and reform their behavior, and get them to, and it doesn't matter how long or how short that's going to take. Some people it's going to take longer, some people it'll take infinitely long, and so we just opt to warehouse them, and lock them up for life. But for the people who commit a crime, and you can clearly see, like, okay, like if we enact this behavior training program and we release them back into society, they're no longer at a greater risk of committing a crime compared to the average citizen.
So a question about that. So regardless of whatever crime they do, you think if you could have somehow a perfect system that fixes them, you should just re-release them into the wild? Because they won't be programmed to do it again, no matter what the crime was?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if we had a magic pill that would cure all rapists, shoplifters, and murderers, and they would no longer have any propensity to commit crime, we should just really just give them that pill and then release them back out into society.
Even before you come and murdered like 23 people for no reason.
Yeah, if they murdered somebody if they murdered 20 people for no reason, no apparent reason, right? I should say, if they murdered them, based on their prior causes and conditions, whatever caused them to murder them, whether that's known or unknown, if you give them a pill and release them out into back into society, I don't see any more problem with that.
Okay, last one?
With that, I mean, like shoplifters, for example, that came up because that started because people were in poverty, they needed food, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, you can't give a pill to cause them not to have poverty and need food. And no matter what, people are going to do whatever they need, do whatever they can to survive.
Mm-hmm.
Last response.
Yeah, that's a good point, right? And so, obviously, the magic pill is it's entirely hypothetical, but I think that based on that, we ought to look at, instead of saying like, okay, this person's a bad person because they shoplifted. I think it's very good what you did, and said like, okay, maybe they shoplifted because they were poor, and because of these reasons, and maybe how can we fix that for them and everyone in the future. And that's all that I'm really arguing, is that instead of blaming people as the authors entirely responsible for their actions, we should look into the causes and conditions that led to that behavior and how to rectify that for them and other people in the future.
So, the beginning statement or presentation had to do with free will and predetermination, and the fact that if there is no free will, then how can we hold anybody accountable for any deed? And that's why they were going down these range of topics of truly nobody should, in essence, be held accountable for their actions. I mean, he started talking about correctional facilities and, in a way, playing like God to a certain extent in regards to the fact that he described this magic pill. And this magic pill was just conditioning, programming of the mind and behaviors, so that as these people were reintroduced into society, you pretty much literally laid out all of their actions before them so that they would in no way act the way which was non-constructive towards society that put them there in the first place. I just feel like if you're going to go down this road of like totality and fatality, then you might as well just include a bunch of other conditions within this reality of yours as well. For example, why don't we all of a sudden, based upon the lineage of events which lead up to an actual occurrence of an event, which in essence is the reactionary substance which creates predetermination, why don't you yourself just then understand the fact that life is something which extends itself in literally every paradigm and every extension that can be? That being said, why are you even coming up with some correctional methodology for correcting predetermination? Wouldn't, in essence, then whatever happens also fall within predetermination, like your actions taken to correct the behavior itself? I just think that if you're going to go that far down the road, then to push it even further and to actually look at the problem from a higher peak, you might as well just say then, why should I even battle anything, right? Why should I even go up against anything? If anything is intrinsically disagreeable to me in my experience, why should I even battle against it? Why don't I just let a murderous, rampageous psychomaniac just do their worst? Doesn't even matter. Reality is this thing which extends itself, which exists in all of its states already, and all of a sudden we collapse our own consciousness into a state, a set occurrence, which is an eventuality, and in so doing, we literally have just proven that there's a higher way of living, which doesn't even include us requiring a huge portion of our lives to entail this behavioral correctionism upon the rest of reality. Why don't we just let reality unfold? And if reality unfolds in such a way in which it literally leads to our own destruction through reality extending itself through a pathway of a murderous maniac, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter, because consciousness, due to the fact that you're aligning consciousness with a set given motion of experiences which lead up to your own consciousness, then you should have no problem with saying that, okay, well, if this guy just goes and just kills everything, then who really gives a shit? And literally, I'll just be manifest in a reality. My consciousness will just be, and I'm immortal, because literally all that consciousness is an imprint of memory, which is me at this moment. And due to the fact that reality extends itself to all these points, my memory is an eternal one, which will always come into being. So why would I waste my life and reality in the pursuit of correcting behaviors when in essence, I'm already immortal? Right? Can you see the fallacy? And like, if you're gonna go that far, why not just go all the way? And literally just collapse the whole argument into, well, if I'm immortal, or whatever, but at the same point in time, like, the experience of the moment, even though the moment is eternal, requires that there's like a stretching of it towards a beginning and an end, that I should still pursue things during this moment of my experience which enlighten my experience towards it being one in which I have no problem reliving, one in which I pursue worthy goals, aspirations, in doing things which heighten the experience, give me greater experience of it, right? But on the same token, I'm immortal, so it doesn't even matter if, the psychomaniac goes and kills everything, and true evil destroys itself anyway, so why should we even give a fuck? Because it's gonna kill itself. If it can't rein itself in and, calm down its horses, so to speak, it's gonna run itself off a cliff eventually. So why even worry about it? And if reality is this thing which is existing, based upon the chaotic expanse of the universe, which it will come into being eventually, which means that you will come into being again pretty much, and that's right now, even though you obviously have some sense of age from beginning to end. The end is within the beginning, and right now is within both the beginning and the end, because right now is a product of the correspondence between what was to now, and the future is within the now, because the future is a correspondence with the present, in that it is the conglomerate of all of these actions and particles just meandering about. So why don't you make your meandering something worth meandering about, you know, into or for or whatever? Why waste your meandering on correcting behaviors? It's superfluous. And if you're gonna go that far, I'm just gonna make the whole thing superfluous and the whole thing ridiculous, and then the whole thing just becomes ridiculous, and then your argument has no basis, because if we're gonna go that far, then, you know, we just might as well talk about parallel dimensions of reality and everything in between. So, yeah. You know, and right there you might think, oh, well, you just said that we're supposed to be heightening our experience and pursuing these worthy things, and what if there are things which are getting in the way of that, and so we have to, in essence, confront them? I don't necessarily think that's true, because I think our perception of time changes with the allotted time we have. So if we have an extremely short amount of time, then it doesn't even matter, because that time will, in essence, then balance itself out for us to have a valuable experience of time within just this shortened amount of time. So it doesn't even matter that there are these things infringing upon your experience, because we'll just apply what I said before, and you just let it just do its thing and just don't give a shit, because you're eternal and immortal, and it doesn't matter if you're cut short, because however short you're cut, literally it's going to be extended into a time of experience for you to experience, because you can't experience non-experience. And so since you're experiencing it, it's a total experience, dude.
Awesome. So I just want everybody to notice that we started off with free will, and I don't know if that's a metaphysical claim or a metaphysical topic, but it soon got into ethics, which I think objective morals are independent of free will and determinism. I don't think there was an argument made for that, but it's just really interesting to see where arguments seep into. So, right.
Chris or George?
George, you want to go?
Yeah, sure.
All right, okay. George is going to go. George is going to give a presentation on why capitalism fell, and if he makes it successfully, I've heard that all of our tuition will drop by $2,000. Is that what Kaka said? I think that's what she said. So, okay. Hold on. So George, introduce yourself, and once you start making your argument, you have 3 minutes.
Okay. I'm George Labonte. I'm a law and constitutional studies major with a minor in philosophy. This is my talk on capitalism. Is it bad, actually? So capitalism, which I'm here defining as an economic system centered around the private property ownership and for-profit venture endeavors by the investor class as the primary driver of economic activity, is a morally reprehensible system. Under capitalism, it's not merely the means of production that are owned by the capitalist class, but indeed the very means of survival. For the vast majority of people that are held by people for whom we have no access of holding them responsible. They have no accountability to us. We all know the statistics: the richest 1% have as much as the poorest half of Americans. The richest 8 men in the world have as much money as the poorest half of the global population, and so on. This should strike us as problematic in its own right, but what I really want to get into here is how capitalism fails on other axes of oppression. So for example, in the 1980s, at the height of the US AIDS crisis, a new securities market emerged around the buying of life insurance policies of HIV-positive individuals with terminal prognoses. The inadequate healthcare infrastructure and poor government response to the AIDS crisis led thousands of terminally ill gay men to sell their policies to pay for their medical expenses, and the investors who bought these policies made millions of dollars off of the debts of a generation of gay men. Then there's issues of race. Most of us are aware that there is a racial income gap, that is to say, blacks and Mexicans and other racial minorities make less money than whites on average. But even if you account for income growth, there's still a gap in wealth. That is to say, even if you take a black family and a white family who have the same household income, the wealth disparity is still dramatic between the two. This is because during the 19th and 20th centuries, various programs such as slavery, segregation, redlining made it far more difficult for African Americans to acquire property. And because whites owned the property that blacks lived and worked in, the growth of white wealth outpaced that of African Americans, even in those exceptional cases where pay equity was impossible. And these effects accrue generationally and continue to this day. And then there's the issue of capitalism's effect on the global south. Imperialism is the highest form of capitalism, as Lenin says. And capitalist exploitation of the so-called third world certainly hasn't slowed as we enter the 21st century. Furthermore, the outright malicious effects of companies like ExxonMobil on the environment, which we now know they were completely cognizant of at the time, will disproportionately affect countries across the global south and create millions of climate refugees. Companies like Exxon were knowingly and are continuously knowingly destroying the world, and the capitalist system not only allows for this, but in fact enforces it. And I think across every system of oppression, whether it's animal rights, gay rights, trans rights, capitalism exacerbates these problems. Even if it isn't the cause of it, it contributes to them and reinforces them. And this is why I think capitalism is a fundamentally unjustifiable system.
Purposes, will you give us your term for capitalism? Again,
Oh,
your
yeah.
definition of capitalism.
Yeah. So an economic system centered around private property ownership and for-profit venture by the investor class as the primary driver of economic production.
Awesome. Okay, hands for your questions and arguments. So we'll start with Ross.
Will you define wealth?
Wealth is the accumulation. I'm using wealth here in a sort of broad term, but basically it is the accumulation of capital, of monetary or product value that can be used to purchase other things in the future, right? So equity could be a good way to define it in economic terms.
Great. Yep. I'm generally sympathetic to your thesis, but many of the examples that you provided, like the HIV crisis or slavery, for example, I think that those were the products of kind of an unusual malice, like racism or homophobia. Are you saying that those are attributable to capitalism itself?
So that's my point, is to 2 points to your question. One, I don't claim that capitalism causes all systemic oppression. My claim is a bit narrower than that. It is that capitalism exacerbates all other existing institutions. So in the case of slavery, you might argue, yes, slavery is the result of racism, although I think we could also make the case that, racism exists to justify slavery in many ways. But also, isn't that sort of the highest form of capitalism, the idea of property ownership at all costs, that even extending that out to human beings, right? And similarly for HIV crisis, right? Obviously, capitalism did not cause homophobia. Homophobia has existed for a long time. But, the fact that the investor class could profit so greatly from the deaths of thousands and thousands of gay men, I think is indicative of the sort of moral failure of capitalism.
So, you can look at that another way. Yes, a lot of people made a lot of money off the gays, but did that money not end up going in that whole crisis, that's a good way to put it? Did that not money end up in turn going to a lot of research and development that has made it almost livable with the disease 20 years later because there was more funding, research, and economic development into that because there was incentives of people? And then going on top of that, from a broader standpoint, before capitalism, 99% of the world was dirt poor with one dude having all the money. Today, if you make more than $32,000 a year and live in America, you're among the 1% richest of all of human history. And that can largely contribute 100% to capitalism. So I don't know how you can justify, off a couple examples, without at least acknowledging that as an entire country, and even a world, we're a lot better off in the long run. We're a lot better off than we have ever been, and that is largely contributed to capitalism, where it is who does the best at an idea, in most terms, is the one who becomes most profitable.
I reject your premise on a couple of grounds. First, as far as the HIV crisis in particular, yes, capital investment was essential to contributing to the research and development that did fund the AIDS crisis, although we question whether it was a necessary condition of that. But furthermore, the people who made money off of the so-called viatical securities market, that is buying life insurance policies from dying gay men, we're not the scientists. The people who made money on that were not the scientists. And similarly, the scientists at big pharmaceutical companies that develop drugs that save lives aren't the ones who rake in the billions of dollars, it's the CEOs. I think this is the sort of fundamental problem of capitalism and even free markets, right? It's like, I don't necessarily even reject market economics as a valuable driver of progress. I reject the distribution I reject the distribution model wherein ownership of property is the primary way you acquire wealth. So like if you refer to the example I gave of African American families, the reason why African Americans remain poorer than whites, even if you control for income, is because whites own property and African Americans have been systemically barred from doing so, right? It is not the people who produce more that gain wealth under capitalism, it is the people who own more.
I'm gonna look at their hands. All right, I'm gonna focus like a little bit. Ask some questions. Make some arguments. Multiple people. Okay, we're gonna go with Dan though.
Mine was just a clarifying question.
Okay, ask it.
I'm not poking just yet.
Yeah.
You said racism exists to justify slavery. Can you explain more about what you mean by that?
Yeah, if you go and take studies in the sociology department, you'll hear a commonly reiterated phrase that race was invented in the 1600s, and that's perhaps a bit oversimplification, but race is a social construct that largely didn't exist in the pre-colonial era, and in many ways it was invented as a means of justifying the brutal treatment of First Nations people and African American and Africans in general, not just African Americans, under our sort of new Enlightenment values, right? We have to find a way to justify why is it okay for us to enslave people in order to drive economic progress, right?
So this is just a follow-up question for more clarification. So are you claiming that discrimination based on race did not exist before the 1600s? That's almost what it sounded like.
No, I'm saying that race as a concept was invented largely as a result of the post-Columbian era,
But
right?
is that concept defined as discrimination based on solely the color of your skin?
I'm not even saying, I'm saying,
So
I'm
I just don't
yeah.
understand, that's all. Like, I don't.
But I'm gonna drive away.
Yeah,
from
yeah, this
It's
isn't
not-
really
it's
my
not
core
as
point.
here's
Yeah,
argument. What else? Yeah, Liza.
I guess one of my questions is just like, what would you suggest instead of capitalism if you think it's not working? Like, what should we do? Like, how can we fix the problems?
Yeah, so I think there are a number of approaches that you can have to this. I think that countries like the Scandinavian countries, Norway and Sweden, have found a sort of happy middle ground between the full-on Stalinist socialism that we all know and hate and the sort of free market approach. I think that there are ways that you can sort of disincentivize ownership as the primary generator of wealth and re-emphasize market focuses on progress. But more importantly, I don't know that you need to have a solution to a problem to recognize the problem itself, right? Like, we don't need to have a cure for cancer to say that cancer is a problem. You know what I mean? So I think that at the very least we should, even if you don't think that Scandinavian-style socialism is the end-all be-all, and I don't, I think at least recognizing that there is a problem and that there can be alternatives is an important first step, right?
Yeah, couldn't one also argue, since the capitalism came on the scene, like really kind of the way that we look at today, since about the beginning of the 1700s, that the net result has been overall better quality of life and less sexism and less racism over time, and that how can you say that it's just gotten worse?
For who?
For everyone at large. I mean, would you not argue,
I
say
think
today that today we're a lot better, that everyone's a lot better off than they ever were before, especially before it was introduced onto the mainstream? I'm saying that there's definitely been growing pains, and there is with everything, but...
I think people in sub-Saharan Africa would take issue with that, but more importantly...
Right, but I mean, it's not perfect, but would you not argue that even for today, that a lot of those people are still better off, and that can be directly correlated with capitalism?
I don't agree with that, but even if I did grant that premise, I think the most fundamental failure of capitalism that we are going to see is yet to come, and that is global climate change, right? That this is going to disproportionately affect the third world, but it's going to ruin us all, and this is largely a result of capitalist industrialization. And maybe you could argue, oh, the industrialization would have happened under any economic system, but by that same argument, I would respond then, the growth and wealth that resulted from industrialization could have happened under any economic system. So you can't have your cake and eat it too, you know what I'm saying?
With Brian?
Yeah. And then, so you talked about how the Nordic countries have found a perfect balance between capitalism and.
I didn't say perfect. I said a balance.
Oh, okay, so a balance. Then wouldn't you acknowledge that in some sense, if you look at the prosperity that those countries are having, that part of it might be motivated by seeking economic gains by certain individuals?
See, I would argue that a lot of the growth and benefit that you see in countries like Denmark especially comes from nationalization of major production industries. That is to say, distribution of ownership across the entire public. Now, you know, I'm not an economics major. I'm sure economics majors in the room could put up a good argument to the contrary. My only thesis is that it can work as an alternative to capitalism without like destroying everything, right?
But I'm saying they're not entirely socialist. Like
No, but I'm saying like the fact that free market capitalism is not isn't the end all be all, and this is sort of a demonstration of one example of that. Or you could even look at, you know, a country like Cuba, and Cuba is not great. I'm not defending the Castro regime. I'm saying that like as far as like equity and you know, wealth and overall measures of human well-being, you know, Cuba generally, it isn't right now, but across most of the 20th century, Cuba managed to stay ahead of most Latin American countries. And that, again, I'm not saying that that's perfect. In fact, it is far from perfect. My point is just that an alternative does exist. This is not the one and only system that can produce prosperity.
So I have kind of a comparison about a healthy body, whereas how do we intrinsically gain the health of a body? And it's in its ability to move effectively. And if the body itself cannot move effectively, then we'll say that it's diseased and there's conflict residing within the body and it needs to be fixed, the issue needs to be fixed. But if we assess the ability of the body itself, capitalism, to move, then we can see that in comparison to a lot of other bodies that exist at this moment, it can move much more effectively than these other bodies. I think that a lot of the statistics that you cite, where you talk about these other countries are better off with what they're doing, it has to do with a lot of the population size. And I think that the body itself regulates itself well. Obviously, if it was to totally take advantage of the market, then it would collapse itself. And in essence, the people that were selling goods would have no one to sell goods to because they would bleed them dry. And they would, in essence, kill themselves off. So in that way, it regulates itself and it has sustained a healthy body and movement, as we see with many programs that the nation itself runs at the forefront of, such as the space agency, such as the military complex, such as the educational system. And then when we bring in statistics into play, we see that the comparisons have no relation because we're talking about such a smaller body in comparison to a body which is large and vast geographically and also with the population.
George, last response here.
Yeah, so I think I understand the point you're making. If just to stick with the body metaphor, right. I don't think that the human body operates like a capitalist system. I think in many ways, like the biological systems are sort of a great example of how non-capitalist, non-competitive thinking can sort of benefit, right, growth, right? Like if you look at, you know, insect populations, for example, like eusociality, this sort of collectivist attitude towards growth and overall betterment is why, you know, bees and ants are so successful. And I think the human body, right, doesn't operate on a capitalist system. You don't have each cell trying to go out and be its own, trying to acquire as much as possible and grow and grow and grow infinitely.
Stop.
Right?
The next discussion on capitalism, I kind of feel like I expressed myself fairly well in that one. The first one I had actually kind of walked in on. So also I was kind of filling out the room, so to speak. So that was my literal first response in regards to that one. But the second one on capitalism, I feel like I actually embodied a well thought out discussion. But I think there were some points that he didn't necessarily expand on like he should have. Like he was saying all these things without actually presenting any evidence through research to support the notions of what he was actually saying. And then somebody who commented was saying actually the reverse is true, where we have this data which shows, for example, you know, some of the wealthiest people to ever live right now, and they actually live in a larger percentage than they ever have, and things to that extent. And he just says, I don't believe that. I'm just like, all right. You know, so in that case, definitely the data could have been useful in regards to us actually having a congruent discussion which is down to earth, in which we actually can have a basis for reality and for the basis of these remarks in some sense of how things actually are. I mean, I talked about a body in motion and said that the body itself is healthy because we see all these forms of enterprise. And if these forms of enterprise are actually apparent and visible, then it shows us how healthy the body actually is. And I don't think that the comparisons were relevant that they were making, because you're comparing vastly different bodies. Anyways.
Yeah, cool. Thank you, Lloyd. So, just to show of hands, does anybody have a capitalist body? Does anybody have a socialist body? I thought that, the whole night I thought that was pretty enlightening to figure out, you know, like what economic structure your body has. Or maybe you identify as a capitalist body, I don't know. But, all right, okay. Chris, will you say it? Yeah, what it is.
My talk is a little bit on the other side of the universe from what George just talked about. It's called Catholic Integralism.
So your name, your major, then I'll start when you start.
So my name is Chris Stragel, and I am a history and philosophy major my senior year. So, all right, what is Catholic Integralism? Thomas Pink defines it as the need for a Catholic confessional state, or in other words, it's the state itself needs to confess that it follows Catholic Christian doctrine, preferably in the form of divine right monarchy. So how did the church how does the church relate to the state? The church holds the keys to the spiritual realm, as stated in Matthew chapter 16, verse 19, and the state holds the keys over the temporal realm, the lesser of the two. Being the lesser, the state is only the secular arm of the church meant to execute not only the facilitation of protection and of rights, but also the teaching of the common good. In a Catholic confessional state, it is the obligation of political leaders to promote the good as stated by the church. Their baptism holds them to this obligation. Today, it is often thought that we live in a liberal state that is neutral and that our state allows us all to live in public harmony. Nothing could be further from the truth. Our lives cannot be divided into public and private. Our characters are shaped through our lives in common. Look at our nation today. Is it easier to be a devout, traditional Catholic attached to one's own local community than to be a free-flowing atom driven by material stuff, wealth, and easy sex? Also, the state's neutrality itself shapes its behavior and leads it to define faith as a sentiment welling up within oneself and presenting itself in various ways, instead of correctly defining it as an assent to a divine truth. With public disregard for divine truth, we begin to see the warnings of Pius IX and Leo XIII coming to light as we begin to depart from natural law in the cases of abortion, euthanasia, gender, marriage, and more. Many also believe that we live in a welfare state today. This means nothing if the state avoids the topic of the end of a human life. In an essay titled Liberalism at a Dead End, Dr. Richard Sherlock, here at Utah State, states a religiously committed public official can only act if he or she is either hypocritical enough to assert or unreflective enough to believe that religious convictions about the ultimate ends of human existence can be taken off like a bathrobe when he or she enters the public sphere. This belief is not so dated as the state of Maryland required that all public officials hold a Trinitarian Christian belief until the 1940s. In a liberal welfare state, the state will also see itself as superior to the Catholic Church, causing the temporal to interfere with the internal in an unacceptable way. In the 1870s, Senator James Blaine pushed to make religious disestablishment and toleration applicable to state governments in order to suppress the communal power of Catholicism in urban areas, also stated in Sherlock's essay. The only way the state may endorse the common good is to confess a belief in the Catholic Church. This belief is an assent to a divine truth. Without examining the supernatural end of human life, the state's teaching of the common good is nonsense. Therefore, the state should be subservient to the church in order to serve the public good.
Awesome. Think. Can you make arguments? That's different people make arguments. I think Chris is wrong, by the way, so if that makes you feel better. Okay, Chris, you need to take a seat or stand, and we're gonna start. So, Trace? Yeah.
Alright, so I'd just like to say that if you look at basically the entirety of modern European history, like from about 1300 to now or so, you'll see that the Catholic Church has had a lot of power, and they've not used it to promote the cause of Christ-likeness or anything like that. They played a lot of political games. So you say that the church, that the state should make itself subservient to the state. Sorry, to the church. But the church kind of stooped to the state's level a lot. And so while it's kind of a political requirement for states within Europe to swear allegiance to the Catholic Church, a lot of the land that they had to give up made them not so happy, and eventually they had to break from it. So I'm thinking that the glorification of the church into public life will create lots of political strife, not just from the standpoint of people who of different cultures or different religions not necessarily liking that, just from the standpoint of people don't like having to kneel to the church. It just doesn't work out. Is that a good?
I agree with you that the church, the members of the church historically have abused their power. There have been plenty of religious officials who have taken power and abused it. I grant that. But in today's world, do we live in a better world than that? I mean, are there people who are politically abusing their power today? And do we live in a better world than we did back then?
Let's say so. Can I follow up on that? Yep. Okay. Well, the thing is that nowadays we at least have the ideal that people should be accountable to some secular idea of justice or virtue or anything like that. And you can make arguments about whether that comes from, but the idea that it is in fact secular and does not come from a God that we're all supposed to have faith in means that they're at least accountable to some of the public life rather than how it was in the past, where you admit yourself that they were that they abused their power. So why should we trust them again to not do the same?
Well, I'd like to start with one of the biggest claims I'd like everyone to know here is that in today's society, in our government, we don't use any supernatural explanations to explain the end of human life in our government to make our laws. So we've completely secularized it. So when I said that, is it easier to live as someone who's a free-floating atom, a very transient person who's driven by material wealth and sex? I would say that today if I don't want my children, my future children, but to go on Snapchat and go and swipe on the newsreel and say, is my vagina weird looking? That was a headline I saw today. I don't want my 13-year-old children looking at stuff like that. But when you've secularized everything, you've gone down to only the bodily, the materialist view of things. And then therefore, once we grant one material bodily pleasure, we have to grant them all. And then my Christian Catholic doctrine falls apart in my family as my kids leave the home and go to a public secular school.
Very cool. Let's go.
Which is more important in your eyes, the church or Jesus?
They are not separate, actually. Catholic doctrine states that the church is Christ's bride, and in the view of marriage, when man marries woman, they become one. So they're not different, actually. The church is Christ's presence on.
Okay. So could I
Follow up?
Yeah. So when I've studied religious history, and I haven't studied it like deep, like I don't even go to school either. I read a lot of the internet and a lot of books on this kind of stuff. And so what I've seen in history with the Catholic Church when they get involved with anything state related, it all goes bad. I mean, there's nothing really good that happens from it if you look at history. So, because like Jesus, if you look at his teachings were love me, love others, right? And that's not like it can be. You see what I'm saying? Like and I think it was you said it, like when politics and religion get all involved, it just becomes a power trip, and everyone's trying to get power. So that's why I don't agree with you when you say that the church be subservient to the state.
Okay, bad things happen. But if we look at the state of affairs in Christian states during the Middle Ages, you wouldn't have said, Snapchat headlines that way. You wouldn't have people driven by, capitalism for material wealth nearly as much. You'd have people more worried about their salvation and being taught the ethical virtues of faith, love, and hope in their communities.
You haven't spoken, so go ahead.
Me?
Yep.
Yeah, okay, but rather than the Snapchat headlines, you had them invading countries and murdering people who were in their own religion. So I mean, is my vagina weird, or is someone gonna impale me on a stake? I guess secular society we're more open about things, or a Christian-driven society, and you're the church is integral with the state, and it's they have the church has the power to I don't know, do you see?
Yeah.
So which one is better in your eyes?
There are 2 points here. The secular state is not more open to things, and that is because if I were a state official, like Dr. Sherlock stated in his essay, I would have to take off my religious cloak as soon as I entered the public sphere. I cannot make any religious claim to anything. I'm only allowed to make a secular. Also, aren't these if you have a religious belief, aren't those things worth fighting for if you believe that this is an incentive to find truth? And we are still going to war today, and it's for oil. I mean, is it better to go to war over God or oil materials?
You want to respond to that? I mean, your scales are just creating Snapchat, medieval, oil god, that's nuts. So, you want to respond?
I mean, I guess we could take it back to the capitalist society. So, let me think on that for a minute.
Okay, no problem.
Okay.
Who's raising their, okay, all the way in the back.
So, a new research came out actually this year stating that the number of unaffiliated people who don't affiliate with religion is now 1 in 4 in adults in America. It's the fastest growing religion is none. So are you suggesting that we forced everyone to be part of a religious state, and that's more of a dictatorship than an actual, is that what you're suggesting? Is that those people who are unaffiliated, we force them to be a part of that, of the Catholic religion?
When I learned of this idea, I was worried about the project mentality as well, and trying to make something like that work in the United States, where not a whole lot of people fall under the Catholic faith, and a lot of people are secular and non-religious. But a professor, Dr. Gladden Papin from the University of Dallas, who's the proponent of this view, he explained to me that this is more of an observation and a lens through which Catholic Christians can look through to, and it's kind of an ideal situation for the Catholic Church. Do I think that this would actually ever work in the United States in today's affairs? Absolutely not.
Okay, good.
I guess kind of my problem with that mindset is that it kind of makes Catholics believe that maybe they're better than other religions, or they're better than other people, and as he was saying, that's not really Christ-like to be because Christ-like attributes are usually defined by love. So wouldn't it be better to kind of have a more loving perspective and acceptance of people rather than being so judgmental and kind of forcing your will on other people?
Right. So I'd like to take this away from the coercion and punishment aspect that the Catholic, that a confessional state would have over its people. It's more of since it would be the ideal situation for the church and a Christian community. It would be more of a preventative measure to, prevent outside forces from corrupting. Also, you're assuming when you say that when you say that Catholics would then feel as if they're better than other people. Religious toleration is saying, I tolerate your view hanging around mine, but I still believe that my view is the right one. To say that I don't feel that the Catholic view is better than others would be for me to say, well, we don't really know, I guess I just align here, instead of saying I wholeheartedly believe in this. Anybody who, I assume a lot of people in the United States assume that we cannot know which religion is the right one. But if you fall in line to a religion, it only makes sense that you wholeheartedly believe that your faith does ascend to divine truth.
Right, one last question, short.
Yeah, very short. You admitted earlier that throughout history the churches have been very corruptible and done some very bad things. And then you said that Jesus and the church are of one. So wouldn't that make Jesus just as corruptible as the church, and therefore why in the world would we want them in power?
No, I said the members of the church are corruptible. The church itself is not corruptible. Also,
So even if the top leaders of the church itself do corruptible things and put in corruptible policy, because like say one guy's gets to the top and he says God gave him a mission, but he really didn't, it's because he want to make some financial gain or whatever, and implements it in the church. And that means Jesus and the church are tied to that. And then the next guy thinks that was given to him by Jesus or God or whatever, but it really wasn't given by some corruptible. I mean, it could be just as corruptible as any other system.
Well, I mean, holding that line, I hold the view that Christ was divine, like Jesus was divine, and he was, and so he's the Son of God, God of the flesh. So therefore, in my view, he wouldn't be corruptible. Also, that would be to say something that the church would agree with, that all men have fallen. And then in any kind of government that you would have corruptible people at the top. I mean, I don't see any difference than any other.
Also, there was the presentation on that the state should actually submit itself to the Catholic Church, and that the state should become a state of faith oriented around Catholicism, in which Christ is the center of this state, but it's through the church that Christ is manifest. There were literally tons of different things that were stated by the audience, which I would have agreed with. I did raise my hand, but I wasn't called on, so now here's my chance to speak. My question was going to be, do you not think that a sense of morality can actually be established without these conditions that you're setting forth? And even within this state that you're proposing, do you not also see that within this state there would still be these negative aspects of experience that you are trying to get rid of in the state that we are in now? But who's to say that other comparable negative experience wouldn't exist in this other state? And historically, I think we can show that they did, right? And really, I don't have much to remark on that, because most of what was said was actually what I really would have said. But, to take it kind of one step further and to go where no one else is, anything that is in essence like moral. It is a body that obviously isn't truly destroying the foundations of life, because if it were, then it couldn't be itself, right? And so that's how the proof itself is in the pudding, that things that are themselves moral. And as soon as they are not, in a sense, I don't necessarily think that, things have to be immoral to not be. I think there's some sense of morality in not being as well, right? Through decomposition and things to that extent, where things themselves take on another state, another form, and in that sense, not being is in a way moral, right? Maybe more moral than being. Because to be, we take advantage of what we see so that what we see, we can take advantage of. So yeah, I mean, after going off on that little side note, I would just be like, hey, do you not think that there are many things which in themselves aren't necessarily intrinsic towards a certain character or a belief system, but in other ways can also promote the well-being and health and unity of people? And I think that there are many stories which can be told which accomplish just that. And obviously we see people communicating and cooperating and conglomerating, and in that sense they then are moral because they exist, they have been able to cooperate and coordinate their efforts towards establishing a way of life which doesn't collapse beneath their feet. And so these principles, these stories, these alignments with metaphors which give them a sense of compassion for things and also a driving force to pursue things, I don't necessarily think requires what it was that was stated within the presentation itself.
You know, that's a claim you
Right.
can make without any
Good.
words.
Awesome. So we're going to take a 2-minute break. So talk with somebody, talk about how wrong you were going in, talk about how right you are going now. So we'll be back in 2 minutes. Jason's going to give us a talk on video games. Where did my notebook go?
It becomes greater than the sum of its parts. This is not so for the video game. There is no feedback between the game and the gamer because the manufactured agency of the game fails to meet the qualifications for real agency. Real agency consists of two things: stakes and uncertainty. Every true choice comes from the agent wagering something he cares about for something he cares about more. Friends sacrifice time they could spend earning money to instead be with each other, without knowing how long they have to be together. Husbands and wives sacrifice career aspirations for the sake of their children, even though the future of those children is uncertain. Olympic athletes sacrifice years of their lives to train for gold medals that may never hang around their necks. Growth occurs when such risks end in failure or pay off spectacularly. The highest choices are those with the greatest risk and greatest reward. Actions like Pickett's charge against Meade Center in July of 1863 and the Allied invasion of Normandy. Great stakes, great uncertainty. The video game, by contrast, contains neither stakes nor uncertainty. A health bar is depleted and you respawn or wait for the next game to begin. Dying is meaningless in virtual reality. There is no Omaha Beach in Fortnite. Now, if you win the game, what then? When you defeat the Nazis in Call of Duty, must you then devise a virtual Marshall Plan for virtual Germany? When you win a game of Fortnite, must your avatar relax his sore muscles for a few days before playing again? These hypotheticals are absurd because the video game manufactures agency without cost. Nowhere was this more evident than the spectacle of Star Wars Battlefront fans losing their minds over EA's use of microtransactions. Despite the fact that a console to play the game costs several $100s, the television to display the game costs just as much, if not more. And the game itself cost $80 when it hit the shelves. Gamers were livid at EA for putting a price on some of the game's playable characters. It appears gamers were fine with paying for consoles, games, televisions, and controllers, but when the gameplay itself involved real-world costs, like money, the illusion they paid for was shattered, and all hell broke loose. Creating real costs for playing violates the reason we play at all.
Think about it for a sec, hands down. All right. Yeah.
So what would you say if I told you I formed very valid relationships with many international peoples that I know on a first name basis, and I have very real relationships with that have come about solely through the video game industry.
Have you met them personally?
No, but like
I would say you don't really know them unless you know them personally, like physically.
Okay, so you would say that I really don't know them at all.
I would say you don't know them as well as you would, like personally. Your relationship with them is not complete without knowing them physically.
So you're saying that my level of a relationship is subpar what it would be through like a direct relationship.
Yes.
But is a relationship still better than no relationship?
Yeah.
So in that sense, it's good still.
No. If you're right. If I were to eat Big Macs all day and destroy my heart health, it would be better than maybe starving. But I would say that's the equivalent.
Hey. All right, so you made a statement about the relationship between people, but I think you've forgotten about the relationship that's formed by all art, whether that be a painting or music or a movie, which is that between the artist and the consumer of that art. And so I think that a person who plays a video game is engaging with that art in the same way that somebody who views a painting is engaging with the artist.
That's a really good question. I figured this would come up. I would say there's actually a huge difference between the way you would interact with a video game and a piece of art. I would say, so the purpose of a great artwork or a great book, I would say, is in service of emulation. A great painting or a great book represents virtues that we want to emulate. It tells of a hero who accomplishes something through adversity or through his own virtue, and then we seek to apply those to ourselves. That could exist in a video game. And there are video games in which this happens. I have played video games. Last of Us, I would say, is a wonderful game as far as its story goes. But you can tell that story without the simulation. It's the simulation that's bad. It's the manufactured agency of spending time in a sink, wasting your agency on something that will never net you anything. That is the problem with the game.
So, but the thing is, in game design, what people try to do is they'll try to present a message or a metaphor using the gameplay itself. So they're using the gameplay as a lesson in itself or in the experience. I'm not sure if I can name an example, but I know yeah, something like that. Yeah. But just the very concept of the gameplay itself represents an idea that can be presented from the artist, the maker of the game, to the consumer of that. So I think that because that's an analog of the relationship that you see in any other type of medium, a video game just expands the relationship between an artist and the consumer, not muddles it or whatever you think. So.
Have you played BioShock?
I haven't. No.
Okay. Does anyone know?
I'm familiar with it.
Okay, so what was the takeaway from it? Like, what's the like gimmick, or not gimmick, but like why is it interesting? Like, what does the story add to the game itself?
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, sorry. It is kind of a spoiler.
Ayn Rand is wrong.
that might be one. The point is that it's the lack of free will, right? There's a quote in the game that says a man chooses, a slave obeys, and it kind of plays on this idea that when you play a game, you're only given what the developer gives you. You have no real choice. It's entirely about the manufacturing of agency. So you're right, that does happen, but it doesn't make it and just as good as, say, going to the Met and looking at Thomas Cole paintings.
So what would you say people who have a career, like they do it for a living, like that's their livelihood?
I wouldn't call that living. I would say, yeah, they can do it for money, but their life is a total simulacra. They don't really live.
They're 100% of the time.
Well, it doesn't matter how long they do it. If I sleep forever and someone pays me for it, that doesn't mean I'm living.
Right.
So that's.
Playing video games forever, that doesn't mean they live.
Yeah.
But if you're not playing video games forever, you are living.
Are you saying like are you talking about a balance between like living and playing?
I'm just saying that like it's not possible if they're playing video games 100% of the time.
No, but the time that they spend playing video games is time not spent living.
Keep your hands up. I'll try to do the same.
So you made the argument of someone who went to the Olympics and looking for a gold medal and never got it. Would you then insinuate that they wasted their life because they didn't achieve whatever the maximum choice was?
No.
And why is that? Just because they still bettered themselves?
No, because living requires making choices. It requires agency, and agency, like I said, is made up of two things. It's putting something up that you value, and there's uncertainty that it will pay off. And growth happens when you lose. Someone who doesn't win, even a bronze, but is trying to still, medal in, say, slalom, downhill. They've still gained something in their life, even if they haven't medaled.
And so, what do you think about when they've included? Like, I was on Snapchat after I went past the vagina thing. I saw they had a top 10 ESPN, and number 8 was a Fortnite 1,000-meter shot or something like that. And that really surprised me when I thought about the people who invest a lot of time, make the choice, choose to spend time playing video games, hoping that they can make livelihood out of it. What is the distinction? If it's just simulation, then when you say practice would be some sort of simulation in a sport sense.
Yeah, because they're not risking anything. When you try to become, say, a downhill skier, right, or you try to be a gymnast, there is not just the risk that you won't medal. There's also the risk of bodily harm. You have to risk, executing complicated maneuvers with your body that could result sometimes in death. And it's that risk that separates it from playing Fortnite. If you mess up in playing Fortnite and you lose, you don't, you can just play again. Whereas if there was I can't remember what skier, Chris would probably know who this is, but there was one skier who essentially unzipped himself by running into a barrier. That guy died, competing. That risk will never exist in video games, so it's not worth it.
So you made the point of like Omaha Beach and raiding Omaha Beach and the troops, but if you were to raid Omaha Beach like every single day for the rest of your life, you'd probably want to kill yourself, if you were doing that every single day. And the fact is, like, we as humans, there's a point where we want to have pleasure in our life as well as work, and for a lot of people video games is that pleasure. And the other fact is, like, for 1,500 years chess has existed, and chess is also a game where just like any other video game, you can face a person one-on-one, and you don't expect to take $1 million from them, and if you win, you don't expect any gain except for to play the game with them. And so I don't see how video games, when I play an online game of chess, how that's any different.
Have you ever played a game of chess with someone you felt like was really, really smart?
Yes.
Did that make you really nervous, like when you were playing? Like,
I played video games with people who I thought were really, really good.
I would say that a game of chess has that feedback that a relationship does. If you were playing a game of chess with the other person sitting across from you, that has the kind of real life feedback of, say, a conversation.
So are you saying like an online version of chess is different than
if you're playing against an AI, that
no, I mean like a person online. Is that any different?
It's like I'm sorry. What was your name? Here.
Austin.
It's like what Austin said about his friends internationally that he's never met. It would be far better for you to play a game of chess, like call up a friend to come to your house and play a game of chess right there, because you will gain more out of that than being randomly matched to people you've never met through some online service. That's not a real relationship.
So would you say games like Mario Kart, like he was playing, if I'm playing with 3 other friends around me, is that a total waste of time as well if we're building a relationship there?
You should probably play Frisbee instead.
But
Is that?
No.
Sorry.
Don't raise your hand.
I know, I'm sorry.
I thought she brought up a really good point, like the whole work thing. So would you also consider most business jobs where like you sit in front of a computer and work all day on the computer just as pointless then? Because it's essentially the same thing. You're sitting down, you're staring at a screen to either entertain or do something that makes you money. So on that same philosophy,
it's not so much the sedentary nature of it that I don't like, because I do like playing chess, and chess is sedentary, and I have an office job. That's what I do from 9 to 5. But I think it's not so much that you're not doing anything physical; it's that you're simulating risk without there being any risk. Right. And I think that's the pleasure that was being referred to.
Right. I think it's understanding, because like the guys who do professions, they go out to like conventions in your life and stuff, and like as a business person, whatever you're doing, you go out to conventions, you gotta go meet people, you gotta talk, you get stuff done. So doing that, just the middle byproduct's a little bit different. So like if one's irrelevant, why wouldn't the other be?
Well, you can build a community around something horrible. You can build some kind of fetish community around suicide, which has happened in some places. You have black metal fans that like to kill themselves together. So it's not I mean, I don't think it's better that someone would have a community based around a video game, but the fundamental fact of the video game simulating reality without consequences makes it not worth your time.
Right. Professor? Yeah, and those are the last ones. Well, probably is
I just have a tiny question. So with your definition of an activity being worthwhile, as I understand, you're saying that one aspect must be that there's uncertainty, and the other one that there's stakes.
Yes.
Right? So what about gambling? Is gambling by your definition then a worthwhile activity?
Yeah. You want to pursue that more?
Do you want to say more? Like, what's the difference then between, what is the difference between gambling, the worthwhileness of gambling?
Are we talking about true gambling, or are we talking like going to the casino and playing slots 100 times where it's rigged in favor of the house?
But you never know, right?
Well, I mean, in true gambling you do. I would argue that the kind of gambling that, say, gambling addicts do at, say, a casino isn't exactly true gambling, because the way that gambling houses work is it's rigged in favor of the house. But if it's true gambling, if you play, say, a game of poker with your friends and you put real money up, I would say that is worthwhile.
Yeah, so I guess the question would be how justified your uncertainty have to be, right? So you have to have the chance of succeeding at least at 50%, right? And I mean, that I think eliminates and really narrows down your domain for
I think it has. Well, I'm not sure. I think if I were to come up with something on the spot, it would have something to do with the stakes. So there would be related. So the higher the stakes, the greater the risk you would want to take. So for instance, if you're an 18-year-old and you get drafted to get sent in a boat to France, that's something very worthwhile. You are risking the survival of the West. You are putting your life up for the survival of your civilization. So for there you have very.
So we go on to another one, the video game one, right? And the whole video game one was like really off base for me. I mean, to an extent, I kind of agree that there are differing levels of interaction and communication, but I think that certain forms of interaction and communication lead up to other forms of interaction and communication, right? It's like he's saying that we shouldn't use any other form of communication and interaction rather than the physical. Well, what about the forms of interaction and communication which lead up to a physical interaction, right? These things forward and, in a sense, heighten the overall experience and the buildup of momentum until the actual meeting and occurrence of the event, right? And, you know, he asked me, well, have you ever met these people online that you talk about in real life? No, but I have genuine relationships with these individuals, and I don't think he understands completely. Obviously, he hasn't, streamed online for like a year like I have. But there are definitely people that I've met through these forms of communication in real life that I never would have otherwise. Like, for example, when I went to TwitchCon, I'm involved in the Streamlabs program. I met people online. I'm like, oh, that's your username? Like, this is you? You know what I mean? Like, all right, cool. You know what I mean? Got to know these people really well. It was really neat. And that relationship continues, right? And we touch base with these individuals every once in a while. And these things allow us to, in a way, stay connected so that we can lead up to those moments of this true experience like he's talking about. But I feel like he totally degraded the experiences which many things themselves house. I mean, it's like him saying that this is nutritionally the best meal or something like that, so this is all you should eat. Well, in doing so, you aren't even going to be able to taste it in its purity for very long if that's all you eat every day. And so much of the nutritional value of a meal is actually in the flavor of the meal itself. That's a stimulus which the nutritional facts can't put on a label, right? That's a stimulus of environment, of the senses, of this true experience that we call life. And who's to say that we should devalue those experiences that have this really profound flavor, which heighten our senses, heighten our awareness of things. They paint us in a picture of reality which is beyond our wildest dreams, yet it has some basis in understanding and allows us to move throughout it and interact with it and experience it, right? I think that he totally belittles the whole thing through what he says. Now,
high stakes and a high payoff potentially.
Awesome, cool. Thank you, James. So, I'm trying to think of a snide remark to make, but I mean, saying that gambling's better than video games, that was hard to beat, so. Okay, Tony is up next. So, Tony will be given a place called Man's. A man lives in a natural world, so. Also, with questions and comments now, raise your hand and I'll try to keep track of you real quick. But if you want to cancel out your question, just raise your hand again and go like this, then I'll know not to count you anymore. So I'm just trying to keep track, trying to give everybody an equal opportunity. So introduce yourself, say your name, and then I'll start when you start.
Oh, yeah. I'm Tony Alder. I am not a philosophy major anyway, and so far I'm the only one that regularly comes to the meetings that's not. I am a kinesiology and psychology degree. I'm hoping to go into the medical field and do orthopedics. So, as he said, mine is called Man's Place in the Natural World. So to start, human society has grown in unimaginable ways, several predictable and several almost inconceivable. Today we know much about our humble places, tremendously unknown alien species occupying a small planet in an incredibly large and ancient universe. We are comprised of molecules forged from stars, and one day they shall return. But at this very moment, the universe knows itself through our minds. We are capable of much more than even this. Unlike other life forms, humans create a culture on a level unrivaled. Our history is full of beauty, astonishing feats, and incredible people. There is equally full of horrors and unthinkable acts of nastiness describable only as inhumane. Each civilization has invented superstitions, gods, and religions which have inspired both sides of human natures that create them. They fill natural needs in our psychology and in turn humans imbue these deities, religions, and powers in the form of both beautiful traditions on one hand and harshly corruptible dogmas on the other that so often lead us to horror. The more powerful and convincing the religion, the more sickening tends the list of its atrocities. Superstition and fear are the most powerful tools in all of propaganda. Yet, supernatural forces in the world continue to go unevidenced and become less likely with our growing understanding of the world. We simultaneously outgrow these mythological-based systems and find new sources of ethics, philosophies, charities, education, moral care, and community structures. As civilizations advance and become enlightened, we are more protected from the dangers in our natural world and environment, and we free ourselves from our ignorance. We are expanding our circles of care and tending away from our darker natures, improving life all around. We must seek out and destroy such ignorance and dogma in a rational manner. It is increasingly important that this progress continues and that we outgrow and rid ourselves of our corruptible dogma, both religious, bureaucratic, and otherwise. But it is also just as vital that we glean the structural, transcendent, and communal benefits from them, using what brings improvement and learning from what doesn't to do away with them, just as we do with other traditions. Order is a fragile thing in the face of entropy and cannot be maintained neither by throwing away the foundation nor disregarding the cracks. We find ourselves in a miraculous, naturalistic world where we can find and create beauty, adventure, compassion, happiness, flourishing, wisdom, health, gratitude, and the pursuit of noble goals through work and sacrifice. The lives we lead are shaped not only by our past and our nature, but by the decision we make every day, by the people of virtues and the meaning that we hold dear to us. Man may never be perfect, but our place is to make use of every second we breathe and help others do the same. For that is all that we have.
Can you just summarize your thoughts and your main gist in about 2 to 3 sentences?
Yeah, so basically just as we continue to outpace other forms of life and consciousness, we understand more about the world and our place in it, and we kind of fade away from our more evolved trains of thought that have given us kind of the dogmas and things that we hold at the base of our structure, and some of that we can keep, but for the most part, we understand that we are in a natural world, that we have a humble place, and to make progress, we need to continue that pathway and on a rational and like that.
We don't need religion to tell us that. Awesome. Great. Cool. Questions, comments? We'll go Frank. Professor, thank you for your enlightenment. So.
Thank you guys. You guys are great. Appreciate it.
Okay, so let's go Frank, then Austin. So I got two. Just raise your hand if you want us first. So.
I'm just wondering, is your claim like metaphysical? Is it like this is the truth of what humans are to be doing?
So I think you're kind of asking, because basically it's a naturalistic argument, and so the difference between like methodological naturalism, which says we have no reason to suspect any supernatural effectiveness, and that's really what I'm going for, not the original philosophical naturalism that says there is definitely nothing outside of this natural place we find ourselves.
So I have a question, but then hopefully I can respond to your answer. And my question is a point of clarity. So you are forwarding the enterprise of abolishing these, what you say are dogmas, such as belief in what you say to be irrational thoughts or investments, more commonly known as religion,
Moreover,
or a view of deities.
Right.
Or
Moreover, I think our religions and mythologies tend to have, there's great stories, the Iliad and the Odyssey. I take great inspiration from Greek pantheon and Norse mythology and things like that. And there's great lessons that we can learn from that, and the stories can have like a transcendent aspect to them, which I think is important, and where a lot of our community is based in structures that can be that can use those metaphors and things like that. A lot of people will say, oh, because we know that the Iliad and the Odyssey are mythology, as a people aren't really saying this, but someone might say that of Christianity, we can do away with the whole thing. And I wouldn't argue that at all. I think there's a reason that these are very important in our community, and we have to find what works from them and do away with the rest. But in doing so, we don't need to take on these kind of faith-based belief in things without proper evidence. And it doesn't follow from that we also have to take like the church and just follow the dogma of whatever they say because we believe that they are the voice of God or whatever.
Okay, so my response to that then would be, do you then not take like multinational corporates to be entities that are on, let's say, like another dimensional level where they have in essence become a super intelligence or a super organism, which is a term which would be used in biology, if I am correct, right? Where you have a landscape. A landscape is an exchange of information which itself becomes a greater body, like you yourself are a body. And so in that sense, could we not say that deity and these manifestations of deity, and perhaps our own manifestation out of chaos itself, which is a deity, these things are of the natural order and of the natural occurrence within the nature of reality.
Yeah, so if I understand your argument, then I totally agree. If we look at deities as just kind of this naturally emerging state of, the superorganisms, which, we can talk about with like bee culture and things like that in biology, then yes, I'm totally on grounds with that. If we look at deities in a useful place and say like, okay, well maybe there's not, a real entity out there watching me angrily, whatever, as I walk around and think and whatever. But it's useful to say that there is this transcendent aspect of our culture that is useful to take and try to emulate or, please or whatever you use that for, or avoid the chaotic deities and things like that. That's very useful, and it doesn't require us to then think that they are actual real things that if we don't follow their rules, then we don't have to tell children that they're gonna literally be thrown in a pit of fire in hell for all of eternity if they don't follow these religious rules. We can tell them the stories and say this is a lesson from that, or however, and we should be like this, be like Hercules, be like Jesus, whatever, that's fine. But there are just better ways to cause people to act in pro-social ways that are also rational and don't require adding on these mythological concepts.
Frank had something?
It seems like you claimed that faith-based belief might not be ideal, not very good. I think that science usually we put at the top of logical, scientific methods, super logical. I think even that kind of requires a good amount of faith, granted less than religion, but still it's pretty faith-based, and like think Kant and our lack of ability to have access to the things in themselves, or think like quantum physics and how it's kind of making us question a bunch of things about how we used to think of regular stuff like that. If you share this view at all, how does it fit into your main idea? If you share the idea of faith and science?
Well, I don't want to misunderstand how you would define faith-based versus scientific. I don't think scientific necessarily carries moral aspects, but they can be useful tools in such a thing. And the point of, like, I like what you said, quantum physics is causing us to question what we know about this. And what's great about that community is that when we do these, mathematical things, and they work out, and we can test them, and from that we can gather that this is, then we have this theory that's working. But that's so much different than dogma, because you're not forced to believe that. No one's gonna, tell you're a bad person if you don't, or tell you you're gonna be punished if you don't take on these quantum physics. In fact, if you can prove that wrong, you're not a heretic, you're a scientific hero. And so it's constantly evolving, and that's what gives it its strength, is that it's malleable, not dogmatic.
Now, you're saying nobody would call you a bad person if you didn't believe in scientific methods, like the POTUS and climate change? That's crazy. That's something. Who's up next? Yep. Oh, sorry, James. James, you go.
I was just gonna ask, so you said that some mythologies have things to offer us, and not everything is good. By what standard are you measuring that? Like what should I value in Norse mythology, Greek mythology, and Christianity, and why should I value it?
Well, it depends on what aspect you're going for. If you're really on the Odyssey because it's a beautiful piece of entertainment, but also within that you can take the metaphors and the lessons and the reason that we all can agree that this is the hero and what he's doing is heroic, and use it as means to teach your children that that's something that you should emulate. And if that works in a society, like I'm sure you would argue that Christianity has a huge base in our culture, and there are many aspects that it's been a positive influence. And this story, by emulating or by taking these metaphors, has produced effects that have allowed us to grow. And I think that's what happens evolutionarily with religion. We can say the same thing in aspects of Eastern religion, things like that. For me, Norse mythology, I'm even wearing like a Fenrir necklace, because I think the story and the metaphor behind it is very powerful, and it's a great reminder to have. But I don't think that there's an actual giant wolf down to the bottom of, a deep place in Earth. I can have the benefit without also being afraid of the mythological aspect.
Yeah, right.
So it sounds like you're asking for kind of an enterprise where old things are taken and they're kind of put before the light of reason, and then you say, all right, well, these old things that we are past, they are now, we'll now judge them for their efficacy or their effectiveness. But I'd say that the value of those old things are that they are living, that people can identify with them, and that they can use them, not just as the wisdom of old people, but that they can really be engaged with in an identity. So I'd say, what is the rationale behind your enterprise, or what right do you have to say, all right, those things are, we're done with them, and the only efficacy we have is their literary value, basically. Like, why would we abandon it seems like you're taking them away from the passion and the experience people have with them, and kind of distilling them into their literary wisdom rather than the experiences people have with them. So I'd say, why would you want to do that?
well, it's not just wisdom that we can glean from them, but I do think that that's a huge aspect. I mean, I think that a fallacy a lot of people make when they fall away from religion is say, oh, we need to just throw away the whole thing. And that's not at all what I'm arguing for. I'm saying that yes, there's wisdom, but yes, there's also a sense that you can engage with the story and identify in a way that gives you this kind of transcendent experience, and that's necessary, I think, in a successful human society. And I wouldn't say that we should look at all these old things and throw things away. Like I said, we need that foundation because order is a hard thing to come across, and people in the past, much smarter than us, have put combined work together to create this structure, which is an incredibly amazing feat, and we can't just throw that away. What's that? Oh yeah, just basically, we don't have to throw everything off the table. We can say there's parts of the Bible that are good and there's parts of it that are disgusting. You know, there's some immoral laws in the Pentateuch which no one here would agree with. But there's also proverbs that I have on my phone that I think are beautiful and things that we can aspect.
One of the other discussions talks about getting rid of pretty much folklore and religion and mythology and things like that. And I feel like he didn't necessarily quite understand what I was saying when I asked him if he believes in superorganisms or multinational corporations becoming in themselves entities which people worship through ritualistic behaviors like going to work every day and doing these OCD behaviors, which is pretty much just another word for ritual towards accomplishing an event. I think that worshiping itself is an act that's put in practice. I mean, sure, you might say, oh, you're not saying a prayer. Well, the prayer is in like the actual action itself. The prayer is in through the ritualistic behaviors, which reinforce the belief system, which then in essence, it gains a body and becomes a functioning entity. Why do you think they're called corporate entities? Okay, it's a body in motion. And my only thing is that with what he is saying, like these people that want to take it so transcendental, like they have no problem like taking it there, but then they miss out on the picture when they actually take it there. Like he's talking about, you know, we're the product of the stars and all this other stuff. And I'm like, dude, so are you going to sit here and tell me all of this, but then not believe in that a body itself can be organized of smaller bodies? And you yourself have a necklace of, you said Fenrir on there. Well, do you not think that the wolf Fenrir becomes a living body as much so as the acting participants of this body, which believe in the mythos and then in fact create the reality here on planet Earth, where this thing becomes an acting body, a living organism, a superorganism, which in essence adheres to the guidelines and the mythologies of this creature. So who are you to say that this is not true, when in essence, if you're going to take it there, I'm going to take it there and show you that you're wrong, pretty much, right? And say that these things in themselves become acting bodies through the participants, through ritualistic behaviors, which then in essence give the body its feel, its history, what it does, and how well it adheres to these guidelines separates it from other entities, which have other spirits, which is a feeling within this place, within this being, right? If they're going to take it there, I'm going to take it there. But the thing is that they take it there without understanding what is there, and then I point out to them what is there, and then they don't understand what is there still.
That we can learn from.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so Peter's just going to set up his PowerPoint real quick, and all these guys are going to get mad because I didn't tell them they could use PowerPoint.
Oh, so that's why you was last.
PowerPoint. So yeah, that's why he's going last.
Part of classroom simulation though, not really doing what you're learning how to do.
There, PowerPoint's just as bad as video games. Okay, we have one last argument tonight, and I wrote it wrong on the flyer. It's called Science and Symbols.
The person to ask would be the guy on the right track, Chase. He's obviously the coordinator. And I think if you put this is things like this, if you put yourself in here, he'll contact you.
Just like when I have my
Yeah. I mean, he's only because doing meetings.
Oh, you got fractals up there.
But it's more of like a casual, like you're drinking beer and make a chat just about what I can.
All right, here we go.
Right, okay, so say your name, major, then we'll start when you start.
So my name is Peter Call, and I'm an oddity here. I'm a dual major in physics and philosophy.
So you're even worse than the rest of them.
I'm even worse. I live in a contradiction of social construction and fixed realities. Anyway, so my premise is science and symbols, and just as earlier as there was a premise made about how there's analogous structures to the universe that we use to and we put myths into those. I'm going to be talking about how that occurs, why that is, and then I'm going to make a few claims that are pretty interesting. So that's a Vanderbilt factor. We'll get to that later. But anyways, so I study complexity, and this is kind of my thesis that I'm studying for philosophy. It's called the plectic, which is Greek from plektos, which means woven. And it understands this interwoven relationship between chaos and order. And you can think of chaos as an increasing order of complexity. So as simple systems expand, higher order behaviors emerge. And order can be justified as those simple laws that generate these higher order behaviors. So this is a true fact. There's 4 forces of nature in the universe and only 12 subatomic particles, okay? And yet we have all of this. You have phones, you have clocks, TVs, everything. But it's generated from these simple components. And we're gonna get back to this, but that's kind of the universe we're in. And so we have a Big Bang, right? It starts off really small and then boom, explodes. And that's 14 billion years right there. And then you have a system of your brain. And it's kind of like the universe in that no single neuron holds consciousness, yet as a system, together you have a bountiful amount of conscious thought, emotion, and range of freedom and will. And just as the universe started as a single point with only 4 forces and 12 particles, you now have this complexity that has emerged. And this is a cycle that continues throughout our universe. This emergence of high order behaviors from simplicity to higher order behaviors. And this, you can see this in our global network, the internet, your phones, Facebook, everything. This is a simple behavior that has higher order complexities. The Wood Wide Web, the trees, have interconnected behaviors that help maintain forests from a diversity of species. So there's a cross speciation of interwoven wood-like structures that help maintain its higher order behaviors of complexity. And that's a really cool fact. And then we have, Indra's net. So now we're transitioning to the scientific modal to a mythological, a religious one. And it gets interesting. These complex structures that are analogous to the universe also exist in our religious. So this is an alchemical transformation or transmutation of like the 13th century when they're trying to figure out how to make lead into gold. And this is Islamic geometry, and like the Mandelbrot fractal that you observed earlier, this is just as mathematically complex, yet it is religiously significant. And so what I claim is that there's these simple, that everything that we constructed in our reality is analogous to the structures and functions of the universe. And that the structures and the functions of the universe are also analogous within us. And so I'll make a few claims here, is that because of this, we view the world fundamentally through chaos and order. And because of this premise, there's an asymmetry of values of truth and falsehood. And also there's, in fact, this is perhaps the best way to reason in our lives, is this type of complexity, or using this. So this is fundamentally what we do as a species. And that's my premise, and that's it.
Okay, awesome, thank you. Do you have any questions or arguments or confusions?
All right. So we taught you made this PowerPoint, and you led up to this idea that the structure of the universe is analogous to the structure of people and the way we think, right? But I would like to say, what if that's just an illusion, right? What if in the expiry, chaos and order appeal to us because they're easy to understand, they're evocative to us? Or like when we look at Islamic art, the mandalas or something like that, just because we like to make complicated things that kind of add up. And we like to see the structure in there, to see how they add up to big and complicated things. And so we're just kind of wishful thinking ourselves into thinking that because the universe is also very complex, it must represent something that we like as well.
So you're asking how do we make this distinction?
Yeah, how do you make the jump between, yeah, these are just things that we like and these are actually directly analogous?
Okay, so I would say that this is Robert, the neurophysiological networks in your brain have a layer of action to reaction to the world, right? So how do I know that this isn't just a pure novelty of my brain, right? How is this not a social construct? Because I'm basically saying that these things aren't social constructs, right? And I would say that we're designed with this intermediary layer to build meaning. And this meaning has to be analogous to how the universe works. Otherwise, we would violate certain conditions and it would be impossible to exist correctly. So it would be like saying, I have a room full of, 10 kids, right? And then I murder them all. But that would violate, social and necessary conditions. Yeah.
So how do you know that we as humans don't impose order on a chaotic world in a sense, in that the order is not actually intrinsic to the universe? It's really just a matter of us, right? When we do a science experiment, right, we say, okay, we've observed this data and it's statistically significant, right? Like how do we know that we're not just that order is intrinsic to the thing that we're measuring and we're not imposing that order onto?
Okay, yeah, no. So how does the scientific method work? Is that what you're asking? Is that...
No, not necessarily like how the scientific method works, but how can you say that order really is intrinsic to the universe, right? And not just, you do an experiment, you write a paper, and by doing it, you're not, right? So when you write a scientific paper, right, you make a discovery, you're saying, right, that discovery is intrinsic, right? And you've actually found a real meaningful pattern in the universe. But how do you know that the scientist hasn't simply imposed an interpretation of the universe, imposed order onto the universe? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So how do I? Yeah, I think what you're saying. So this phenomenon was directly talked about by Karl Popper, if you're familiar with him, and he said that for something to be true, it has to be falsifiable, right? And so if I make the claim that all geese are black, right? And I said, I discovered this is now fundamentally a true part of the universe. It only takes one white geese to disprove that. So if a theory or a model isn't intrinsically falsifiable, then it can never possibly be true because I can't know if it's ever wrong, right? And so a simple way to disprove this would actually lead to suggest that there are certain things in the universe that we think are constants, but actually change.
But wouldn't the necessity of falsifiability in science, right? And I think we can both agree that that's necessary for scientific progress to advance. Wouldn't that mean that essentially what you're going off is you're just measuring these patterns, right? And you're not actually you're creating all these models and these conceptual overlays to understand reality. But these models and these ways of understanding reality don't actually exist independent of our understanding, right? It's solely within our conscious mind. It solely exists within our own minds, in a sense, right? Like, so for example.
Yeah, no, so there's an interesting phenomenon, like, so I guess I answer that in a different way than you're probably suspecting, is that, I mean, fundamentally, for me to exist, right, and for you to exist, there has to be an operation that created us, right? Something exists for us to exist, right? And if that's true, right, and that hasn't changed, then why would it change later? And so we need to have a consistency. And so I guess to use this model, right, so there's something called the infinite unknown. And you could describe it as the noumena, the telos, something that exists outside of an a priori, right? Something that exists, but we have no way of conceptualizing it. Words, there's no word for it, there's no thought for it. This is so beyond. You can think of it like this. When Columbus sailed across the ocean, right? Yet there was no cognitive, or there's no conception of a mind society. But that existed, and it was true. And for him to interact with that, something must have independently existed outside of his conscientious view. And so there has to be things that exist outside our conscientious view for us to respond to it in some way, for us to exist.
So my first comment is to kind of clarify, I think, his question, and I think that if I was answering it from your point of view, I would say these models mimic reality because we are, in essence, the product of these models. So we then create them, and even if it is us making order out of chaos, we are in essence created by this chaos. So that's why they're reflected in us. We say that we're not natural, right? But how do we describe ourselves coming into existence through this chaotic mess? So to say that these things aren't natural would to say that we ourselves aren't natural and are not a cause of natural causes.
You're saying we're not natural.
Huh? No, I'm saying if I was to answer from him and he says, are we just simply making order from chaos and then observing these orders? Well, yeah, but that still doesn't mean that it's not a natural process because we are a natural process. Mm-hmm. We're a process of these natural processes. Yeah. But if I was to then, that's besides the point. Mm-hmm. If I was to argue against this, and I think this looks very familiar to me, it looks like Empedocles' argument of love and strife, but this is just chaos and order. Mm-hmm. I would say that this is too complex, and the infinite unknown can be known. Yeah. And I would say that to know all these things, all you have to know is one single simple point. Mm-hmm. The simplest particle that there ever could be, if you knew this simple particle, then you would know all things that could exist or would exist if you knew this particle in its fullness. Yeah. And it's the simplest thing that ever was. And that means that all things are simple. Nothing is this complex mess. It's just a matter of understanding that.
No, so that's a good question. How does development occur across a system that has the same parts, right? And how does that change over time, all right? So think of it like this, right? If there are only 4 particles in some forces in the universe, then why is there such a diversity of phenomena, right? That can't be accounted within those 4 forces and 12 particles of themselves, right? So how do you create, like, that's like saying 2 + 2 = 5, right? Like I'm basically saying that. Right? I'm basically saying that I've just created a higher order that's not implicit in these products. And, well, this emergent phenomena kind of exists. So if you take economics, you often hear no one person can make a pencil. It takes an entire global society to develop this thing. And so in physics, there are systems of behaviors that generate higher order behaviors that are greater than the total sum of behavior. So it's almost like 2 + 2 = 5. And we can generate that type of structures in our society. So if like we're so complex now that I can be transgender, that concept could not have existed 3,000 years ago. So it takes higher order complexities to generate higher order complexities. And so for that to occur, there has to be a self-organizing phenomenon, right? Like there has to be something that bridges this gap. And so going back, like, so you can think of it like a Mandelbrot fractal, like I showed you at the beginning. Is that it? Is that but so what I'm saying is there this type of mechanism, if it does exist, is like what you said. It's so useful that I could take a single particle and I could say, wow, look at all these behaviors that are potential out of this, right? But if it's not like this, then I have to totally, rethink this, right? And that would disprove it. So there's a layer of falsification here, right? But if this is true, if this type of complexity or behaviors exist, then you could theoretically be able to account for a lot of things. Like you could make a transdisciplinary model, which is what this is attempting to do.
Cool. Thank you. Trevor about how to get involved with our discussion nights. We really appreciate it. They're a really fun time. And if you'd like to speak at a next event like this, I think the only requirement would be is that you have to come to the discussion nights, at least a couple of them. And then we'll let you speak on anything you want, as long as it's a good argument. So, which I thought all of them were bad. But no, I'm just kidding. Okay, but have a great night. Thank you.
I think that maybe the better point to have pulled out of the hat would to have said that nothing ever moves, because the proposal itself stated that life itself was in this constant state of fluctuation, and the fluctuation itself is what gives life. And I don't necessarily disagree with this. I've written many things on this myself. I mean, the whole name of the activity that we're at is called Change My Mind. But I've written also many papers on where everything itself is stationary in existence, where everything exists in the state that it already is in, and there is no fluctuation, there is no movement. Everything is still, because everything already is where it is. And in that way, this could be argued against, in that there is no motion, there is no fluctuation of this order and chaos. This isn't a valid model. Everything is at a standstill and always has been. Anyways, the day's over. Peace out.
So, then we get to the one who was like so broad in all of his little things that he's talking about. I had no clue at all what he was trying to say. It's like he was saying that, proteins act in this way, so that's why hair is this way. Okay. Sure. Like, pretty much that's what he's saying. He's like, oh, here's the design of chaos and order, and we see that simple things take a complex mechanism to make them, like an entire society to make a pencil, right? Well, I mean, a writing utensil doesn't take an entire society. I can create a writing utensil with my fingernail and then just rub in some dirt on the etched in surface, and there you have it. You know what I mean? Like, also, I feel like if I truly want to make something an argument and pose the other side, I'll make it true. He's saying that there's this constant cyclical nature of events which range from order and chaos. Well, I'll just disregard the whole event of motion itself and say nothing ever moves. Everything is in a fixed position. Where everything is already there. Disregarding the speed of light, who cares about the speed of light? We know where things are going to be if we truly know their motion, which in essence, once we know that, things become motionless. It's like once we've reached the speed of light, everything's at a standstill because we've just literally disputed motion. the speed of life is literally no movement at all. Because in essence, as soon as it is, everything is. And in that sense, it's congealed. It's in a hardened state of already being where it can be at all points in time. Like I said at the beginning of this discussion, the past is withheld from us, seemingly, but truly it's here. The future is withheld from us, seemingly, but truly it is here. How is it here already? How are these seemingly far-off events already here? Well, the past is here, and we are in the past. Let's go back 500 years. This event right here is already within the past. The motion and the movement of everything, which leads up to this, is already, which means that there is no motion. Everything that is already is. And this position of things already is. And it's already there simultaneously, overlaid within the point in time which was previous to now. And the same goes for the future as well. So no, there is no motion from order and chaos. Chaos is within order, and order is within chaos. There is no model like this. Things don't move in this manner. You know, like, honestly, I don't even feel like he even knew what he was presenting. Because one kid, like, he has all these models up, and it's just going from picture to picture to picture, and I'm just like, dude, like, what are you even trying to say? And so it's like, whatever anybody says, he's like, yeah, you're agreeing with me, and it's just like, okay. Or, you know, he was discussing with one kid for like 10 minutes, and the guy was like, how do you know that we're not just making order? And I understood what the kid's question was and actually refuted it for the kid presenting's point. I was like, well, he's saying that we follow this model as humans because we ourselves are a product of the model. We're not a separate entity from it. So in essence, we are natural, just like this is natural. We're not necessarily separate from reality. When we go out and say that we're observing reality, well, wait a second, we are a part of nature. We are a part of reality. Why is it that we do what we do? Well, it's a set given amount of conditions which formulate our beings, which give us a mode of operation and, you know, our practices and what we do. So of course we follow this. If the universe follows this, then we follow this because we are of the universe. And then the kid, like, up on stage was just like, you know, and I tried to say something else too, and I'm just like, well, you don't need to know any of this, and, you know, none of these models are true because all truth is represented within one particle of truth. And in knowing this single particle, we know all truth. If we know this one particle. It's simple, right? And then he's like, well, yeah, that reaffirms my model. And that's why I'm saying, like, no matter what you say of this kid, he threw up so many images on the screen. It's just like, what are you getting at? Like some golden rule, like ratio here? Like, you know, like phi or something? Are you trying to say, like, you know, things follow phi, not necessarily in the number sequence, but it's all about how you apply the number sequence in regards to behaviors and characteristics and stuff like that? Like, or, you know, this fractal geometry and stuff like that, which, like I said, I can go as far as these people want me to go, and literally I'll just make up something which shows that whatever they're saying is not right. You know what I mean? Like, no, the universe isn't in this constant state of literally recycling itself over and over and over through eternity. It's one. It's one, right? And it's centered around the one. There is no motion of it. So yeah. So yeah, I don't really know at all where he was trying to go with that. It's like saying geometry exists and reality is a reflection of geometry, and we ourselves extend this reflection because we're a product of reality. Okay, so how do we refute this? We say that this isn't reality, this is all a fucking dream, boy, and this is just a vision of Descartes intermingled with Martin Gardner here, boy. You know what I mean? Like, he identifies at one point that for him to actually make a statement that can be claimed as true, he does to a certain extent identify something recognizable within his claim. And he says that there for this to actually be a claim, it has to be for it to be false. Allowed, right? Otherwise it's a blanket statement, false, which holds no right? Because if somebody just gets up on stage to it being taken towards what are we supposed to say to that? It's right? Just how are we supposed to refute idea? Not even that. It's not even that's pretty much what he's saying. It's just like talking about the black swans or the geese. If we just say the, how can we take it in any sort of context towards being a statement? He's saying that for him to actually make a statement in a sense which hints at a notion or aspect of reality following. One thing that I would like to identify is he plays on this notion of his concept has to be allowed the ability to be proven false, otherwise it can't intrinsically hold a truth. It's like getting up on the stage and then saying the word the. How are we supposed to refute that? You know what I mean? Like, I could get up and then say, no, it's not the, it's what. Like, how, you know what I mean? Like, what is it saying? It's not necessarily like hinting at a notion of some sense of meaning. It literally is escaping meaning. And his whole topic of conversation literally borders on this because it's just like 3 or 4 or 5, 6 slides of just a bombardment of imagery, which he has collapsed into some uniform ideology, which is, from what I can gauge, chaos and order and the fluctuation of either, which is why then I say, well, there is no fluctuation, there's no movement. Chaos is within order because the moment chaos exists, order exists within chaos simultaneously, like as how the past resides within the present. So there is no fluctuation from order and chaos. They're simultaneous. Literally, order exists within the chaotic now, and chaos exists within the ordered moment. There is no differentiation and fluctuation between the two. It is all a fanciful desire of your mind to see these things. Same with geometry. That's why I went on the whole thing of like, well, we can refute this by saying like none of this is real. And so for you to apply this to reality holds no ground because you're applying something to a false reality, right? So if I disprove reality, then his claim is that this is the set motion of conditions which reality follows, and I've disproved this to be reality, then obviously it's false. What if reality is truly when we dream? What if this is actually the dream? Reality is when we go to sleep and close our eyes. That's reality, right? Reality is actually even existing beyond our own dreams. Reality is what exists before we're even aware of existence. That's reality. That's how I would argue against his claim. But to an extent, he literally borders on the notion, in my mind, of just getting up on stage and saying the. You know, how do we refute that? Well, I mean, the is like a preposition for a thing, so I would refute the thing. I would get up and say like, nothing. You know what I mean? Or like a concept or something like that, which is still a thing. I would refute it with nothing. That's how I would refute it, which is, I guess, why I went on the whole dream metaphor there for a minute. But yeah, he's like, gets up there and says, this is some bold claims I'm making. And it's like, dude, what are your claims even? Like, you know, it's like he tried to connect some overarching ideology with all of these different profound images of existence and of the movement of matter and the conglomeration of matter into organized things and substances, and saying that there is advanced complexity within very simple things, and very simple things themselves, it doesn't add up as to why very simple things require advanced complexity to exist when in essence they're simple, right? And so that's why he went on the whole thing about 2 + 2 = 5 in this sense, because a pencil takes an entire world to make. You know what I mean? So he goes off on all those things. Then we just go down this whole realm of discussing antics, and it really is just fanciful, utter nonsense, in my opinion. But you know, what is utter nonsense? But milk. That's utter nonsense. A fucking creaming substance that comes out of some nipples. Utter fucking nonsense. Yet, it's rejuvenating for the soul and for life. The only thing that I wanted to touch on is the individual talking about reducing the dogma within society. I mean, these stories, and he touched upon this himself, you know, about the value of these things beyond believing them to be just strictly true within a literal sense, right? But these things identify so much more of our characteristics, and I think that taken on a whole, these stories themselves paint a picture of reality, even though they seem very fanciful and misguiding. But taken in the greater context of all the stories that are told, these stories truly are the interwoven fabric which connect our minds and create the reality which we see. You know, I went off on a real parallel there, actually making them real, where these thoughts and ideas become organized bodies acting through the participants of these bodies, which in essence reflect the values and beliefs that are upheld by these mythos, right? And then I made them living things, and that's why when I was talking to him, I talked about superorganisms, superintelligences, corporates and businesses and constitutions and acting bodies. But along those lines, he almost is verging on a Platonic sense where he's talking about literally ridding the world of every story which doesn't fit into a very blunt and what I would call dry understanding of human nature and of existence, and a very dry description, and not even like a humorous dry, like literally a blunt, dry, bland description of all reality through the stories that are told, you know. But then I told him in the story that I told that reality itself isn't this blunt, dry, bland thing. It is literally these things coming to life, and we ourselves are a manifestation of these stories, and we manifest stories, right? So who's to say that they're true or not when we ourselves are acting bodies within the truth, which is reality? This statement is false. This statement is false, which is a true statement in that it was stated, but the statement says it's false, which contradicts the fact that it's actually true. That's about as petty as that kid's statement. You might call that stupid, but how stupid is it really in comparison with your profound statements about geometrical designs, which obviously you show pictures and images of them being on woven fabric from thousands of years ago. So is it really that profound when Empedocles pretty much said the exact same thing you are before Christ even was? Maybe it's more profound for me to disprove the reality of reality and show that geometry itself and like